Okay, folks, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We've got every type of time around the world going on this morning. Really excited for this one. Obviously, we've got the two regulars. We've got the dazzling Mark O'Sullivan, the tired Britain, Thomas, and we have some Australian guests with us. We have Sean Douglas, Head of Coach Education for the Australian FA, and we have Mark Upton of My Fastest Mile. Gentlemen, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome. How are we all doing?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for joining us.
Mark.
So first of all, let's just go a quick round. We can do a quick introduction, obviously, the guests, and then just what we're up to in the short term, and then from there we'll get into the discussion, which I'm really excited about, to explore a bit more around the Golden Generation report by the PFA there in Australia. So let's start quickly with Mark. How's life in Sweden? Are we surviving?
Yeah, we've had a great week of about between 28 and 30 degrees. Had the kids at home with me. We've been swimming at the end of the street. There's a nice place to go swimming. Stockholm's lovely this time of the year, full of lakes. You just jump in the water.
Yeah, I know you keep posting images on social media.
And getting up early in the morning to do a bit of work, and when the kids fall asleep at night, I do a little bit. So trying to find that balance before I head into a proper holiday lockdown. Right. Yeah, things seem to be okay here.
Yeah. Britain, still watching CNN like an obsession. How's things down in the US?
Well, I'm going to load up on firearms pretty quick here. I'm not a gun owner yet, but we're getting close. No, I think things are good right here as far as like my environment. We're playing a lot. People are, went from quarantine to like reckless beach parties. And so I think that this is going to be kind of the cycle for the next few years. We'll, get together for a potluck, when it's all over, and then we'll have to go back. So,
yo-yo.
Yep, it is a yo-yo. We just don't seem to care, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, we have a large audience from the US, so I'll be careful to say what I'm thinking sometimes when I'm watching the TV, because it's crazy.
Yeah, I feel pretty safe. I don't feel like many people from Utah, where I'm at, are watching this. So little security through obscurity.
I don't know, man. I've seen the stats. Yeah, well, it's Canada Day here, folks. So it's a public holiday. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to enjoy the day with the family. But let's get into, I guess, let's start with Mark Upton. Mark, welcome. I've read your blog regularly. I follow you on social media. Absolutely fascinating, your insight. So welcome, and just tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, well, actually, a little fun fact to start with. When Britain mentions Utah, I have actually been to Salt Lake City. So, 1993, it was Britain. I entered a competition in a basketball magazine here called One on One, and went over for the All-Star game, NBA All-Star game in '93. With my dad. So we stayed in Salt Lake City for a few days in February. So we got a good feel. It's a good contrast coming from 45 degrees in Adelaide in February to whatever it was. But it was good. It was good fun. So I have enjoyed the world.
Was Michael Jordan playing there, Mark?
He was, yeah. He did play in that game. That was, yeah. So his first retirement was at the end of that '93 season, wasn't it? So, yeah, it was good fun. So me, I'm back in Adelaide in South Australia now. So yeah, grew up in South Australia. Spent 4 years from 2014 to 18 in England, so a little bit closer to Mark's part of the world, or where Mark was originally from anyway, and got a taste for the English lifestyle for 4 years, and then been back in Adelaide for a couple of years. In the last kind of 20 odd years, been involved in a range of different roles, mainly in kind of professional team sport, or in England more so in the Olympic sports. Involved, as you said, with My Fastest Mile, which is a a social enterprise. A couple of my colleagues, I think, Mike, you may have met Al Smith and John O'Byrne, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I've met them, Al and Jono, a few times.
Yeah,
good guys.
So,
I've met them
We
as well.
met in Sheffield and in.
They were in Sweden, Mark, when I was with you.
And then we met in Sweden a few times,
Yeah.
I know, but in the UK we met up a few times, but they've been over here visiting us at AIK a few times as well.
Yeah. So up to a few different things with them, ranging from mentoring coaches, I guess, kind of more on the grass, all the way through to doing kind of more organisational, strategic type work. And of late, I think, been having a few good interactions and discussions with Sean and a few other people about football in Australia. So it's all good fun.
Well, we're very fortunate to have you and listen to some of your the work that you've been working on. Sean, welcome. You are the director or the head of coach education for the Australian FA. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experiences.
I think I'm a plant. I'm actually a Kiwi by birth, so I think I've been put in there to destroy the organisation from internal. We have us Kiwis dotted around the Australian sporting landscape, and we're doing a pretty good job at the moment of screwing things up. So my background's as a player, and then just working in coaching, director of coaching at clubs, at federation or state sort of level, then at national level, both in New Zealand and Australia. So, and I still coach, I'm an assistant coach to my wife with our under 11s. And I'm a head coach of under 18s at a sort of, not the top level, not the bottom level, but middle level. So I like to keep in touch with all different levels and keep practicing, keep trying, experimenting. That's sort of me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Well, gents, obviously when we were going to get this podcast together, there was a document circulated between us, and it was conducted by the PFA there in Australia. It's called the Golden Generation Report. Sean, do you want to give a little bit of oversight why that was conducted and what the purpose, the objective, the questions that were trying to be asked and explored with that document?
I think there's always ongoing discussion within Australia. I mean, whenever you have something called the Golden Generation, it tends to suggest there was nothing before it and nothing afterwards. And so, those players recently left and the performances of our national team have gone down a bit. So there's always this discussion around, what do we need to do to get back to those heights, probably as there is in every country. And the discussion really, in my opinion, wasn't very deep. Lots of superficial things going on, and credit to the PFA, for commissioning this piece of research. It was definitely needed. And I think they wanted to add to the discussion, but in a more meaningful way. So I think, I'm not actually privy to why they went about the research, but they do want to grow the game, the PFA, and assist the game. So, credit to them. It's been great to read it.
Yeah, because this kind of reflects some of the conversation we've had with Jason at the Canadian FA and Jan and Yor with the Dutch FA. There are these tendencies to let's adopt the approach from country X. So, and the thing is, like, as was it Jan and Jorg in the Dutch FA said, like, don't adopt the Dutch model. Don't use, because it's culture. It's specific to our culture. So, is this in a way maybe an initial attempt to start investigating your own culture to find out where you are?
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, the report's actually highlighted some things that I thought, but anecdotally, no evidence. And yes, we've had a series of overseas technical directors. We had Dutch technical directors for a long time, and a lot of influence from Holland. And there was a bit of backlash against that. Then we had a Belgian technical director, and this work came out whilst we had that Belgian technical director. So yeah, you're right. it could be, you know, to try and investigate our own history, our own culture, and where we currently sit. Which, yeah, and it's as I said, it's a fantastic start.
Yeah, absolutely, it's a really fascinating read.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I took away from it, and I don't know if this is the starting point, you know, we don't obviously want to copy, you know, frameworks or models that exist in other countries, obviously, because the context to that culture is unique to them. But there is still a lot of similarities in the document where, when I was reading it, I was nodding along, and particularly with the context of Canada. I'm not originally from Canada, but I get told all the time, you know, of 30, 35, 40 years ago when they had what they told was like the golden boom of soccer here in terms of the amateur game anyway. And the way that I looked at the trend of this document was, I think obviously Canada being built on the back of immigration, Australia being somewhat similar as well. And when people moved to the country there 35, 40 years ago, they would obviously gravitate to a club that's usually from people that they're used to or origin from, you know, if it's a Croat club, if it's a Greek club, and they'd stay there because that was their social, that was their network. That was the people they felt comfortable with to kind of have that sense of their homeland. Whereas now, and it's happening in Canada as well, it doesn't exist. I mean, people are moving from one club to the next club to the next club, more so to chase this apparent, you know, silver bullet elite program that's going to, you know, spit their kid out from point A to point B at some point. And I think, I mean, Britain, I would assume probably very similar in your world with obviously the marketing kind of appetite that seems to be there.
Yeah, there's when I say there's a kind of a common approach where it's you know, if you get the player in with the right group, that somehow that group is going to lift them to become successful. And you know, part of it is the environment does influence players, absolutely. But I think in some cases we've kind of ignored the personal constraints of the individual and not you know, not looking to affect those constraints other than just to get them in with a really successful group, which, you know, when you're talking floorball, that doesn't necessarily create a challenge point, which would lead to growth. It creates a kind of a coasting environment to which they can lean on, you know, some of the more developed individuals and compete at a high level. So again, we get the spectacle. It's fun to watch, but as far as the growth and development goes for the individuals, it's a little bit questionable.
I have a question for Mark or Sean, actually, since it's just after finishing reading the document, I was thinking that, is it quite common that a country has a certain type of success, and that success is down to more or less some sort of perfect storm as to more of a deliberate plan or pathway, and then suddenly through that success, countries, okay, we're great, we really need to organize everything and be professional so we can continue this. Do you see this as a common pattern? Have you heard about this before? I've seen it happen here, and I've seen it happen in Ireland. In successes in the World Cup in Italy 90 for Ireland, Sweden 94. There was this hyper professionalization and organization of youth football started happening after, because we felt that's the way to continue being successful instead of investigating why we became successful.
Yeah, I think within our situation, I don't think it was linked to that success. We definitely went through that, and I actually blame coach education, being head of coach education. We've structured it far too much. You know, the process or the things we're teaching are, I think, good, but it's not fully understood. You know, we've got a lot of people take it on for the first time, so they tend to copy and paste, and not, you know, coach what's happening in front of them. So I think, you know, we've created these structures that everything is too adult controlled. I don't think that was as a result of the golden generation and trying to keep that success. I think it's come along almost bringing in the Dutch model.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like, there's often a country of success, and then suddenly, right, we have to have academies, and we have to get the best 8-year-olds or the best 8-year-olds, the best coaches, and this
trying to bottle it, aren't they?
Yeah, they're trying to bottle it. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, that process is happening now.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sean, it's interesting, isn't it, that when you mention academies, Mark, really in Australia we haven't had a full-blown academy system, certainly as it would be known in England and the rest of Europe, but that's certainly the push now. But it underpinning that seems to be the assumption you're getting at, Mark, that, okay, if we want to be serious about youth development, well, we need academy structures and then the criteria behind them. Whereas I think we've skipped a step that says, well, what maybe needs to be in the environment and at all those levels and layers that I know you guys have probably spoken about and I've heard you speak about in previous episodes as well, both the more structured, organised environment that we might call the club, as well as the more informal, unstructured environments and things that young people get up to day to day. Have we actually considered that environment first as our starting point, or if we just jump straight to, well, England have academies and the EPPP, so yeah, that's the answer, and that's what we need to mimic. And that's not to say that's right or wrong, but has the level of critical thinking and questioning gone into that as yet? I'm not sure.
Have you guys seen the Hudsucker Proxy? It's a Coen Brothers film. The film's actually it's a little bit irritating in its style, but the main character has this idea. Have you seen it, Mark?
I'm trying to think. I think I have, yeah.
So the main character has this idea and carries it around with him everywhere he goes. And he's got all these kind of temporary jobs and everything. And he's like, I'm not going to be here for long, so I've got big ideas. And he goes to show people the big idea, and it's just a circle drawn on a paper. And he's like, it's for kids. And it's interesting because he ends up lucking into this like CEO position. And he executes this idea, and it turns out to be the hula hoop. And when he's introducing the hula hoop to the board, he's actually like spinning it around his waist, and the board is sitting there like they have no idea what the hell is going on, no idea what it is. And they start asking about, what are the rules? And he goes, it's just fun, and we throw a little bit of sand in there, and the kids use it. And they go through this whole process of the product development, and they set it on fire, and they're doing pricing strategies and all of the structure and everything. And it really speaks to how we go about approaching these problems. We see something good, and we see something that looks like fun, but I think just in our way of thinking of marginalizing it, profiting off of it, we set up maybe some unnecessary structures and some unnecessary steps in order to make it official. And we approach a lot of problems like this. Product development.
Yeah, I guess that's that's been quite. We've taken this up. I think sure Sean and I have had many discussions about the many product developers that turn up at his door selling the answer to Australia's problems.
Yeah,
we've had many conversations about that, and this is kind of I think this is a thing that's happening around the world. I think it's also because we're looking for very, very quick fixes. Yeah. I'm thinking about one of the really interesting things in the report was about how who are the golden generation, Sean?
They're basically the team that did so well at the 2006 World Cup.
The Dukers of the world.
Viduka, Kuhl. I mean, there was a whole squad of them that were playing at the highest level in their club football. Really excelled in 2006. Was it quarterfinals and just went out to Italy.
An Italian who fell over.
Yeah, exactly. So they were so close to making it to the semi-finals of the World Cup, which is unheard of.
There was many of them, wasn't there?
Group of players.
the report says there was many of them were playing, as you say, in those A category leagues in world football. Whereas obviously they did the research now, that's not the case anymore. Would you put that down to? Do you think you put that down to the fact that they, I mean, I don't know, because again, it doesn't go into extensive details, but the fact that they probably have ties, connections in Europe. So therefore, it's because I know in Canada, we've had a couple of people from Nova Scotia in this area. They will leave to go over to Europe, Sweden, Norway, wherever it's because they've got relatives there. So they'll literally go there, bunker down for a summer, try and get themselves into teams, and then all of a sudden they've worked their way through the pyramid or the leagues into some of the better leagues there. Do you think that's part of why that generation, like they had that connection back to these European leagues, or is it just happened to be that they were just good enough and they got there?
I think it's a mix of everything. I think it's harder these days to go there. The players in the top leagues are taken from all over the world. It's connections, passports. Less and less Australians now have European passports. That these guys were probably the kids of the immigrants that came out. Look, I'm generalising here, so it's very hard to say one way or the other for every one of them. But yeah, almost to a T, they had ethnic or immigrant backgrounds, and those clubs, as you said before, were incubators, whether they knew it or not.
So what has been the reaction? So, you do really well in the World Cup and you feel like Australia is gaining a lot of momentum. What has been the overall reaction to I don't know, as we put it here, the declining performance relative to the number of minutes in the big leagues? What do coaches attribute that to or misattribute?
There was a stage there where we had an old national league and we created our first fully professional league called the A-League. That cut ties with all ethnic clubs. It was new entities. It was a franchise league. There was no youth development done in those leagues. So there was almost a case of, as it was called, new football or old football. And there was a split in the game. And I think a lot of the stories have been around, it's the new football that's destroyed this. We've got to go back to what we were doing before, or there's a lot of things like that going on. We had the AIS, which was a very successful program, the Australian Institute of Sport. It was a full-time program for 17, 18, 19-year-olds leading into the Under-20 World Cup, and most of the golden generation came through there. So that was disbanded 4 or 5 years ago. So there's calls to bring that back.
What were the reasons? Why was it disbanded?
First and foremost, the age was brought down. So it was for under 15s and 16s for a period of time. Then it was thought, well, we're putting millions of dollars into this one program for 24 kids. No guarantee that they're the ones going to be going on. So money was tight, and so the program was disbanded. So
the clubs wasn't pay for it now, right, Sean? I mean, that's the idea. Is if the professional clubs, they'll do the job.
Yeah, that's the idea. Is we don't have one AOS, we have 10 around the country. But those, as Mark said, those academies are only just starting, with some of them only having full age groups from probably the last couple of years.
From our experience in the United States, when they started to develop a little bit of momentum, I think people just assumed that it would keep going up and up and up. And there's a lot of assumptions about America being the greatest at this and the greatest at that. So the question comes in, so when do you think America will win the next World Cup? This comes up in coaching education all of the time. And it's kind of interesting to see that coaches on the grassroots level trying to figure out why we're never going to make it, or why we're not going to get into a World Cup. And the attributions they stem from, well, our kids don't know how to juggle, our kids don't know how to do this, our kids don't have this and that. they need to learn, these skills. We see a lot of our Twitter cults on the ball mastery thing. The country's never going to go anywhere until, we fall in love with the ball or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think people are not feeling quite as optimistic about our level, but the good thing is that we understand that we have to change a few things. And I think there's a grassroots movement to bring back, soccer as a whole, and just allowing kids to play and to enjoy it. And the training methodology that they're suggesting is really centered around play and less deliberate practice.
Well, I think that's the key thing in the report, and something that I think which definitely relates to our reality. And obviously you've just mentioned it, Britain, and Mark, I know you do a lot of work in here, but I think that pillar in the report around the environment and the fact that they're playing because they actually love it. It's not a job. It's intrinsically a drive, a desire, this joy in what they do. That's been taken out of the experience for a lot of kids. It's, they're in it for maybe not even their own reasons at times. It's maybe their environment at home who's, pushing this on them. But we need to get back to that. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we had an article wrote by the doctor for Nova Scotia, and he's saying that with the pandemic, we actually have an opportunity to get the parents out of the game because they can't be at the fields anymore because of the restrictions with healthcare. And there was references like it's the first time that people are driving down the streets and there's basketball nets on every person's drive now. That was not a thing 6 months ago. Gone. You can't get basketball nets at the local store because people are now trying to solve the problem. And there's something pure again that's slowly coming around in that environment. And, based on the way that I'm certainly interpreting the report and some of I think that's where we've gone too far on the other side. And I'd like your input, your insight to that, particularly you, Mark. I know that's something that, you've written about a few times with play and exploration.
Yeah, I had a similar observation here, Mike, and I was probably, I don't know how long ago now, but when our kids were out of school for a while, where I live is about 100 metres from our closest field, which is doubles or triples as an athletics field, a cricket field, a footy field. So lots of stuff goes on down there. And we often walk through there. And it was really interesting during that time where people were more home from work. There wasn't ever real strict lockdown, if you like. So people could kind of still gather in groups as long as the distancing was there. And it was really interesting. That oval felt like it brought back community, as in there were mums and dads kicking a ball around with their kids. There were, again, sometime towards the end, groups of kids gathering at distance to kick a ball around, lots more informal stuff happening rather than just the structured training sessions for those sports that use that facility. So it was really interesting. And I saw the same thing. We live on a no-through road, and my lad, who's 12, has got a basketball hoop in the front drive as well. And he's made friends. So during this quieter period, there was a family that's been walking by the front of our place, and they've got a couple of young boys. And all of a sudden, they're now coming around 2 or 3 times a week after school to play basketball with my lad in the driveway. So I agree. It's really like we hear this idea that free play is dead and kids don't want to do it anymore. But again, I think there's a lot of nuance around it. And if you're looking for positives, I guess, amongst COVID, it's been quite an interesting social experiment, how changing some of those structural constraints to see what maybe was emerging or is emerging, like you described, Mike. So, I don't think free play is dead. Someone else mentioned, I saw it on Twitter actually, and where my lad does play his football, they've just put in an outdoor futsal court, which is free for use, open and free for public use. And there was a comment made about how much that's being used, particularly by kind of teenage kids. So again, isn't it amazing that you actually open up the facility for free rather than maybe charge people and create a market? And suddenly we see, this free play that's supposedly dead, and teenagers just want to spend time on screens, maybe isn't as absolute as some would have us believe. So, yeah, I think there's lots of, little weak signals that can be built on.
I agree.
I was going to say
about creating invitations.
Go ahead,
invitation.
Mark.
It's about invitation. That for every no, you can't really complain that children aren't active if your society has loads of no ball playing signs everywhere.
I was going to say, with all the
invitation.
basketball hoops and everything, so the early adultification of soccer is going to breed the new golden generation of basketball players.
That was the Last Dance documentary that did that, buddy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I think that it's kind of interesting because this is kind of touched on in the report there about how the golden generation also, okay, you had a sense of community. They felt they were representing something as opposed to just representing themselves, moving between different clubs. And that this sense of community, I guess there was a sort of a pride, and I guess that's in some way that's a kind of a motivation to continue to represent your culture. I found all that really interesting, but it's also quite this idea of then of the newer generation switching clubs, and I guess it's the idea of far away fields are greener, you know, that, and the idea of getting the best of the best most. And I know, Mike, we've spoken about this in Britain, how kids are just going from club to club to win games, as opposed to learn how to play football. But also this golden generation was interesting about the amount of free play time they played a lot of other sports, but they also had a lot of informal play. And I think I do, and I agree with Mark. I think it's really lazy to say that, you know, kids don't play anymore, they don't want to play, they have this and that. I just think that we've marginalized it so much.
Yep.
And limited it. That we need to start looking at creating invitations and an environment for children to interact with it in more positive ways through sport.
Well, Mark, it's funny when I was with you in Sweden, you had that international tournament with all the big clubs there. I think the most enjoyable football match I watched when I was there was in that little cage to the left. There was like 20 versus 20 in a little space. I think I watched that for 15 minutes. Yeah, that was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was winners stays on and in and out. It was very just spontaneous. A lot of kids just waiting their turn to jump in.
But you're right, it's that invitation. We're giving them too much invitation to go and explore other things. And because that's no longer there, or it's been, should we say, it's there too much, they've gone a bit fed up with it. Now they're starting to go back to the stuff that, you know, I think this golden generation, particularly I know from my childhood, that was what we did. And I think that's critical to that. I mean, we talked about resiliency and all that stuff. It's all connected together. I have a question for whoever can answer. At the end of the document, there's it talks about the football cultural development framework. And again, there's not too much there. Is that a working document, or is that something that's being built? I was fascinated to know a bit more about it.
Good question. And, I think, as I sort of alluded to before we got on, that unfortunately, I don't think this document is having the impact or the influence it should do on the discussion and the conversations that are happening at the moment. You know, there's very little reference to it. We've actually got a group together that's been brought together to advise the FA. They consist of some of these players, you know, Viduka's on there, so it's in the golden generation, are on this group to advise the board on football matters. But I'm not sure that.
Why do you think there's a lack of take-up?
What's that? Sorry.
Why is there a lack of take-up? Why is this report not reaching people?
Because you can't. It's almost some of the things in here is you can't control, and we like to think, well, we can produce the next player. We put them on the conveyor belt. We can control that. So let's do the things we can control.
Right.
I mean, you said it well before. The perfect storm. You know, and I agree with Mark. You know, is I'm getting told all the time, free players dead. But do we just assume that, or do we try and experiment? And this, as Mark said, the COVID thing has been a great experiment. It might be something we should be driving a lot more, because I saw kids out there with their BMX bikes for the first time ever, and making a rally track around the local park, and they had the shovels out and they're making jumps, and I've never seen that. You know, that's the stuff we would do day to day. So they were engaged. They were out there all day. It was incredible. So it's not that they don't want to do it, like you said, Mark. It's the opportunity to do it and the invitations.
Okay.
So, I mean, I guess the question is, and we don't want to be guilty again of
in Australia,
over control free play, but
a vast country. But in Australia, has anybody thought of, are you designing in places where kids can play football for free, as we were discussing earlier, like a futsal court that can't be booked or something? Are there places like that for children to play? Is there plenty of space for children to play?
Traditionally, there's your typical big oval, which may not be the greatest environment for football play if you've only got 2, 3, 4 kids. But you are starting to see more and more of these little futsal courts, or I wouldn't even call them futsal courts, but these little courts pop up with goals and things like that around the place. You know, I know a developer who's a football person who makes kindergartens and creches, and he actually builds them into those properties. Right. So he's trying to influence it in that way. But I mean, those things are paid and for the people that pay there. But the free stuff you're starting to see more and more as councils and governments try and get kids out playing.
Yeah, because I'm seeing it come back here big time in Stockholm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really in the last few years around where at AAK, I've noticed so many kids out just playing football and doing stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And even where I live, there is interesting, but it's I haven't noticed any no ball playing signs. Actually, I think they've almost disappeared from where we are, which is really interesting. But I'm seeing lots of free play happening, and there seems to be a real, particularly in the suburb area, resurgence of street football as well. A lot of it going on there.
I think the question's even being asked in some of the bigger, football league markets. I mean, I remember when I was watching the No Hunger in Paradise documentary by Michael Calvin, when they were starting to ask the questions around the football cages in South London and how that's where now these are the kids that haven't been through the traditional, academy system, but they're coming in right at the end when it matters and just basically pushing out all the kids that were in there for 8 years because they're unorthodox. They don't do things in the same way. They don't think the same way. So I think that those football cages, if you want to call it, those playgrounds, those invitations, I think it's the questions are even now starting to be had in the bigger markets. For example, with England being obviously my homeland, and I would expect that more and more of those will continue to pop up. Because you're right, I think that is where it probably comes down to. That's where you're going to get that drive. That's where you're going to get that love,
Yeah, and I think it's possibly going to be helped as well by, say here in Australia, Sport Australia or Sport England, the bigger drive by the national body for sport as well, like activity and wellbeing and mental health and all these things, is seeing the value of, or the need to open up more opportunities and invitations for people to engage in physical activity and sport outside of just structured competitions, leagues, and obviously we know the dropout in youth sport, particularly from those environments. So I think, there's going to be some momentum building and, working with councils around facilities for that. So I think, talk about it, maybe not the perfect storm just yet, but I think there's a few factors in play that could lead to a really positive change. I guess in Australia, and that's part of the report as well, I guess talks a lot about a football culture. Is football obviously competes with the other football codes, Australian rules, rugby union, rugby league, arguably as well as basketball. So it's not the clear number one code, which is probably similar, isn't it, to the US and Canada in particular.
Yep.
So that's also a factor in terms of, and I think, Sean, I imagine you'd be the same, is to get just kids out playing. I don't think we're too fussed what sport it is, but in some countries, obviously that's going to be football. If it's a European country, it's likely to be a lot of football that gets played informally, whereas Australia, it could still be quite a range of activities, which is all good. but yeah, is a more unique factor maybe in the mix if you do have an eye on ultimately, developing the next golden generation, if you want to call it that.
Isn't I think like maybe an issue might be that the first point of contact for sport with children now is organized sport. So in the document it mentions that its participation has increased, but that's just really at the broad end of it, because you've got more clubs and more organized clubs and academies and more organized whatever private enterprises or whatever, and so the participation rates are really high, but that's the participation rates in organized sport, isn't it? Which really does not give an indication of, it's a very poor measure of something, I think, because that's their first contact, and maybe trying to figure out how children's first contact with like playing football or a sport can be through a more, holistic, more natural entry point as opposed to something that's organized. I think that's the real challenge that I see, is that can kids discover the sport in another way as opposed to just through an organized venture.
One of the areas that we tend to see is at schools, playtimes and lunchtimes. The kids all partake and play, a lot of them play our football. Or they could be playing basketball, and that's an introduction to the sport, which they really enjoy, and then they tend to join a club, and then they get overstructured and leave. But I think it's, as Britton said before, it's become a product. We talk about marketing the product, about penetration of the product, the Mini Roos brand. Very little about the experience of the participant, almost none.
Yeah, I think that's a massive issue, isn't it, Sean? It's about what's the purpose of the system. So if you start looking at ideas around systemic change or systems change, and someone like Danella Meadows, who's done a lot of work in systems thinking, is one of the highest leverage points is what's the purpose of the system. And arguably in Australia and elsewhere, we've got very good at designing junior products to hook young kids into the game, whether that probably started with Auskick in Australian rules, probably in the 90s, I think that was. It's Milo cricket in cricket, it's Mini Roos now in football. But what's the intention of those programs is to attract kids to the game early, but it's not necessarily to keep them as participants of the game, it's to turn them into revenue generation.
To attract customers.
And that sounds blunt, but that is the case. And there's even been quite explicit in, I think, AFL. They've got like a kids team, and their strategic intent is to turn young kids into lifelong fans of the game, not participants in the game as players or coaches, fans of the game, which invokes a transactional nature to it. So what's the purpose of the system? So you for me, have those two pathways. One is the elite pathway that we all know and have critiqued. The other is this other pathway to essentially become a customer and a revenue generator for the sport. So if we're looking for change, I think that's the questions that are still lingering and unanswered and not discussed, is what's the purpose? What's meaning and purpose of this sport? How does it provide meaning and purpose to people's lives? Is not attended to for me.
And I think we're on territory there for Britton and Mike.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say, Mark, I mean, it's like the point you and I kind of had a chat in Twitter. It's asking the question, but then it's also, is society ready to listen to the answers? And that's a huge issue where I know that we're having it even here with the return to play. We're just trying to get them back on the field, connect with their peers, have fun, and really not overstructure it at all. But we are getting a bit of pushback because society wants the structure. They want the label, the wow factor. And we've said we're not doing it. We're just getting them back because they've been starved for 3 months. Let's get them back on the field. So I worry about society's willingness to even listen. Yeah.
I mean, but is it society's job to listen?
if you're asking questions, someone's got to listen to, I guess.
I think kind of understanding the broader. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, kind of trying to understand the broader social context or whatever. Again, I don't fully understand it in my environment, but I'm starting to recognize and kind of embrace the fact that we are performers within our own environment, and we'll likely have to adjust and adapt our strategies according to the environment to get a little bit closer to where we want to be. So, you know, as we talked about with players, starting with where they are and inching towards what is, you know, optimal, what is ideal, rather than trying to start there. And so it's baby steps, I think, as we've discussed before. Go ahead, Mark.
No, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Baby steps. There's kind of an idea, I guess, that, you know, in terms of building trust and relational capacity. So maybe it's not asking the question, it's inviting people into a dialogue.
Right.
And the challenge, maybe, if we talk about where's trust at a societal level at the moment, trust of politicians and government and all those is probably at, you know, a fairly low point. Is the work often is just to build up the trust again, to have the dialogue and build the relational capacity and get into these conversations, and then questions can come, and, you know, and as you say, it's baby steps, and we kind of see where it takes us. So yeah, again, that doesn't sound fancy, does it? And it's not certainly no silver bullet to talk about that. But Mark, I mean, that's a large part of what you've been doing the last few years, isn't it? Really, okay.
Interactions.
Yeah.
Just constantly interacting with people.
Yeah.
Out in the microsystems of practice. We're out with coaches, with parents, just trying to interact. So it takes a while, but the whole aim is that in the end, when some issues arise, the questions are much better. And then when the questions are much better, we learn an awful lot from that, because there's stuff we miss as well.
For sure, yeah.
And I think that it's about relations, about, you know, it's a community thing. I think we're back to trying to build this community, and that we represent the club, and we are the club. Like, as in, I like what Dennis always says, you know, he says, I'm not AIK, you're not AIK, we are AIK. It's this kind of almost space between us, how we are to each other. And I think that's one thing that I've learned so much from my experience in AIK is the importance of, again, it's where you place the coffee making machine to increase the amount of interactions for people to have these conversations. Yeah. And that's even how you design learning environments, you know? So yeah, it's so important. And, you know, we have kids turning up at sport, are in, you know, they go to physical education in school, and they're being measured. It is some sort of measurement happening. There's, you turn up at a club and there's trials or something, and you're in this group and you're in this group. So they're being judged and measured. Or then they're in school, and we've had this real, I just have a big problem with these fundamental movement skills being measured. You know, and it's like, this is completely uninteresting for children to be measured. You know, there's no context for them. You know, there's a great story by James Rudd there in a podcast, the Perception Action podcast, and he speaks about a girl, when he was testing fundamental movement skills as part of his PhD. Some girl couldn't do a gallop, is where you was 1 foot in front of the other. So she'd have failed the test. But then he said during break time, she was out playing tag with some friends, and she was actually galloping, running down a hill, because that's how the body's self-organized to create the task, chasing somebody down a hill. So that's when he kind of realized, he said, like, oh my God, what are we doing? You know, so we're measuring, there's this constant measurement of kids going on in schools and physical education, and then in sport as well. So really we should be just having more dialogue with them and allowing them to develop their own dialogue with their environment.
It's I think it's starting with the grassroots coaches, and you know, the early player experiences. I think some of us naively believe that we're somehow going to prepare them for some more intense environment by offering, you know, an environment with intensity. very, very early on in structure and that sort of thing. I've been coaching for a while now, and I heard this for the first time, that a couple of 2011s are having a discussion with a friend that plays at another club, and they were like, so what do you do at practice? And 2011s, kids born in 2011s are doing a beep test once a week.
Measurement.
So like, yeah, maximum aerobic speed for 8 and 9 year olds.
I've seen this at professional clubs in England.
Have you?
Yeah, 9-year-old sprint test.
And
the reason that was given was that, well, if we have to leave them go in a few years' time, it's usually because they're slower, and we can show these tests.
Justification for exiting the game.
Yeah.
It's because they're on the assembly line, and you need to keep checking in to see if they're on the right one, and then you have to put them on a different one. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I really want to have a conversation with this coach and kind of ask, so what is your philosophy on this? Like, what are your intentions? I'm sure they're great intentions. It's just kind of maybe a misunderstanding or a misattribution of what will help them become successful.
Yeah.
Identification.
I had an interesting exchange last year, Britton, with a coach who I'd seen at the club my son's at, and I'd seen him take a few sessions, and I thought he actually was doing and does a really nice job of kind of balancing, just the fun and a bit more serious or kind of deliberate type practice. I thought he does a really nice job of that, and we kind of got in conversation after I'd kind of been there for a few months, and I kind of saying about my background was a bit more in high performance sport, and as soon as he heard that, it was amazing how he kind of changed to wanting to almost justify, we're doing a bit of this fun stuff, but I know next year we're going to get more serious. I know we need to get more serious. We're saying that kind of perception of what this should be about, whereas actually it was largely, from my perspective anyway, for that kind of age group, 10, 11, 12, on the money with what he was doing generally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely like good intent, but it was a really interesting insight into perceptions of coaches.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with this balance a little bit of being very, altruistic and socially responsible, but really wanting the kids to enjoy themselves, to invite exploration and that sort of thing. But understanding that in the future there are fewer and fewer seats at the table, just with the way that we have things structured. So many of them, they play for their high school here, their secondary school or whatever. And that's a big social status thing. It's a motivator for them. They want to play there. And we kind of use it as a carrot in a way, to kind of drive them a little bit more and more intensity and that sort of thing, because it's important to them. But I also recognize that a lot of kids, when they don't make those high school teams at tryouts, exit the game right away. And so it's, I'm not sure if we're doing more harm than good with that narrative of, hey guys, we really need to prepare for this time in your life. Or if better narrative is, hey guys, it doesn't matter, take any opportunity to play, enjoy yourself. Looking at kind of our little local environment, this is a really, really big motivator, for parents. Parents feel like if their kid makes it into one of these teams, that they won't be hanging out with the wrong crowd. It'll keep their lives structured and busy. In some cases, you have like people in this community, they don't move outside of this community. So they grow up here and they buy a house down the street and live there. And so you have these kind of sports dynasties at this high school level.
It increases in their perception. I'm sure it increases their social hierarchy within the community.
Totally.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think for too many years, maybe tried to fight that and tell them that it didn't matter and that they were wrong and that there's a bigger world out there, but they don't care. And it's probably not my place. It's we're out there trying to help them, we're trying to add value to it. So I guess more and more maybe accepting that it doesn't necessarily have to be how I would do it or how I would have it if in a perfect world, and just kind of understanding that that social culture eats my strategy for breakfast, right?
Fantastic. Actually, I have a question for Sean. Just thinking, I just thought that. So I reading this report. Will you be doing anything in coach education to shine a light on this report?
Yeah, we're doing a fair bit of work at the moment, evolving the whole approach in coach education. And I'm doing a lot of work with Mark to understand the stories and the narratives that are happening in different regions. How do we support coaches in the club better? Less focus on courses. But yes, there will be a part of the formal course structure that will look at these sorts of principles. The things coming out of this report, the things coming out of reports from different areas around the world. And as you said, there are some similar principles that are showing up. So then it's about, well, how do we apply those in today's context, in today's social environment? Because this report is the past.
Sorry, would you think that understanding that, like, I can think of maybe parent coaches would say, would probably get great value out of this report when you speak to the gold generation and doing what they did and what's happened now and what was the differences. And like, I could see some great value for coaches, particularly the novice coaches or the parent coach that's there because of their child.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to do is actually have our entry level coaching course, whatever you want to call that, rename it and have every parent who comes into the club go through something like that. What is it you should expect for your child? How will your child, not how will they develop, but what are the types of experiences you should be pushing for your children to try and change that transactional nature of, I've got to find the best club, and if they don't give my son a spot, I'm going to go somewhere else. And the use of this report and the community and the connection that the players had to their club, and that the fact that they stayed there until for most of their lives, youth lives anyway. This provides some great evidence for that.
Yeah, and I think sort of conversation and course material as well.
As I said, I'd like every parent to go through that, not just the coaches.
Yeah, of course.
Ron, is there do you think then there's a need then not only just for parent coaches, but there needs to be more marketing dollars spent within just trying to get this information out to parents who are spectators? Because I see there's a gap there as well in North America. Like, again, we talked about COVID and the affordances that are coming, the behaviors that are now changing. And I said this to my last boss at Soccer Nova Scotia, said if we don't realize now that we need to put our marketing dollars here to try and educate the spectators, the people that are really a part of the entire environment of the child, because there is real opportunity here. I mean, this document would speak to a lot of parents, even if they're not a coach, which could maybe slowly, I don't know, embrace that culture change that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I said before about getting the parents through this introductory course or whatever you want to call it, I want that to happen in the club, face-to-face, club people running it, create that connection between the parents and the club. As part of that, we can recruit some of them to coach the kids, right? Call it a facilitator, whatever you want to call it, give it a different title, get mums involved in working with the kids. It just changed that perception of the word coach for those younger kids. But as Mark said, I want a big thing about creating that community, that connection. We're struggling with volunteers. A lot of clubs are dying, that the cost is going through the roof because we've got to pay for everything.
Yeah.
And getting back to, as Mark said, that purpose. Why do we run these sports for the kids? What do we want them to experience from it? That's my big drive, not just Coach Ed, but that connection and purpose.
Could be the title of the podcast, Mark.
And anything that's that purpose is noise.
And it could be the title. What do we want for the kids? There you go.
No, but I think it's a fascinating report. I really resonated with me. Just so much in it, and I'm going, yeah, I've experienced this, and been over in Canada and been over. I knew it would really resonate with you, Mike, and you as well, Britain, because having been over there working with you, there's so much there's such international issues being brought up in it, and actually you know this, Mark. It actually reflects some of the stuff that's been on the 2015 IOC report on youth athlete development.
Yeah. I was going to say, again, without going anywhere near suggesting there is a recipe for developing top players, but I think there are some converging on some patterns of that combination of the informal, unstructured play with, at the right time and ages, the really high quality coaching and environments that are, at times quite challenging, but also supportive. There's lots of other things around what you might call psychosocial as well, angles. And I know that the Golden Generation report was done in partnership with Victoria University and led by Damien Farrow. Have you met Damien?
Yeah, I met Damien. We presented together in Kisikalo in Finland.
Yeah, so it was structured in a way that's been quite similar to other kind of retrospective studies in terms of developmental histories and the way it asks qualitative questions and looks at training and all those things. So there's a few common things I think that come up that they say probably actually do maybe transcend specific cultures now that can give us that kind of general sense of direction, but how you're going to get there will then be very culturally specific and even more micro than that, obviously.
Possibly this is something that emerges in all those conversations, interactions like the one Sean is speaking about, where the clubs are holding our education and facilitating more possibilities for interactions. For
sure, yeah, and I think like as you said, Mark, basically your principle is interaction, and that's arguably as good a way as any to, if you want to try and shift the system, is change the nature of the interactions, either the existing ones, change their quality, or to create new and different interactions and see what emerges from that. So again, there's even some, I think, kind of guiding principles for the how you might try to start shifting things as well. But early days still in that regard.
Very good. Very good. All right. Anything else you want to have a chat about before we let these gentlemen go to bed and let Britain go back to bed?
It's not going to happen. Schedule the haircut just right after. Yeah. I'm going to be hating life today.
What time is it, Britain?
Right now it's 7 a.m.
Oh, mate, come on. That's
6
standard.
a.m.
That's standard. I got a 2-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, but so what's next, Sean? What do you think? Where are you gonna take things next?
I think I'm doing a lot of work with Mark at the moment, just trying to have a lot of different conversations and discussions around. We're in a bit of a stage at the moment. COVID's hit the organisation financially very hard. There's a lot of us stood down. We're without a technical director at the moment, so there's sort of no leadership in that space. We've got a new CEO who's bringing in some new principles and new ways of working, so everything's sort of a bit up in the air at the moment. So we're just taking the opportunity to try and raise the quality of debate, because there's a lot of debates. It seems people have no football to coach, no football to watch, no football to play. They've all taken to social media to voice their opinions on why we don't have the next golden generation, or what's the cause of that. So I think working with Mark just to have those conversations with different people and listen.
Good. So when do you think when does are the leagues started over there? Are kids playing football now, and have you started like senior leagues? And
the grassroots, depending different states. Obviously, we're a massive country, just like the US and probably Canada, but some of them have, I think, start this weekend, and others probably over the next month will start to come back. Professional league starts probably in a couple of weeks, and then senior football towards the end of July. Looks like it'll restart again, COVID permitting.
Okay. That's an interesting challenge ahead of you. I wish you the best. And I think that, is this report available publicly?
Yeah, it's available publicly. I've done a webinar and referenced it. I've done a couple of presentations referencing it as well. I think it's fantastic. But getting it out there more widely and getting it part of the discussion is not at the moment.
Can people download it from somewhere to read it?
We'll link it in, Mark, in the description. Yeah,
definitely link it in. It's really, I think it's valuable, and it's also for any country or culture. It's valuable reading.
Yeah. Mark Upton, just before I let you go, obviously I know you're involved in Aussie Rules. Are they back in? What's the condition with the hands and the ball? Is that sport back on?
Yeah, they're back on. Yeah, they've started up 3 weeks ago, maybe. Although, yeah, it's still very much up in the air. Obviously, a lot of the Aussie Rules clubs are based in Victoria and Melbourne, where Sean is, and given that there's a few hotspots of COVID emerging again there, that's all kind of up in the air. But they seem pretty determined to make the show must go on. The games must be broadcast, and the broadcasters must be satisfied. So it seems like they're going to find a way to play out the season.
Well, fun fact, I was a Bulldogs season ticket holder for 1 year. So there you go. When I lived in Melbourne.
When did they break their drought? 2016, I think it was.
Yeah, I watched that live from Canada, but I was there 15 years ago when they were dreadful.
Right. Yeah. They had a fair period of being dreadful. So. Well,
that's why I picked them. But I did like West. He was the main man for them at the time.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
He plays for transfer. I think he was played a lot of basketball when he grew up, and it definitely transferred to his kind of vision, awareness in tight spaces. Yeah.
All right then, gents. Well, listen, I want to thank Sean, Mark Upton. Thanks for obviously staying up to do this with us. Marky O'Sullivan, Britton, thanks as always. And we'll have more.
We'll link the report in.
I will do. Thanks, gents.